Hey, good morning. I'm Oliver Gao. I'm the director of Cornell System Engineering Program. I have been very fortunate to talk, to our great speakers that we bring to Cornell Ezra System Seminar Series. Today, I'm really honored and delighted to welcome Professor Barry Smith. Actually, Professor Barry Smith, he is a SUNY Distinguished Professor of Philosophy and a Julian Park Chair. And actually, he's also the director of the National Center for Ontological Research. So, as I was talking to Barry earlier, actually, in system engineering or system science, as we are looking to complex systems or systems, and lots of time in the end, we come to ontology. We want to answer questions from the root of the problem. So Barry, welcome to our system conversations.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, when I was looking, when I was visiting your website and looking at, how much you have achieved in this whole area. Of course, all these things started from after you did your, PhD and then you move on. And I believe your ideas, your thoughts, and also career can evolve. And I believe in that evolution that shows really a systems path. So I think a lot of us, including our audience, they are very interested in learning more about you, evolution of your career, your thoughts, and how did you get here?
Good. So I started as a philosopher, as you say, working on the history of philosophy and primarily on the history of ontology. Mm-hmm. And I was always searching for a way to apply philosophy to the outside world. So there is, as I'm sure you know, something called applied ethics. And philosophers can get jobs in hospitals as ethicists to decide matters of life and death, use of resources and so forth. And so I was always thinking about the idea of applied ontology. And the first example that I was confronted with was in geospatial informatics. Mm-hmm. So in Buffalo, we have a quite distinguished group of people working on geospatial informatics, and we had students in common, and these students made us realize that there was a way of using ontology in order to advance geospatial informatics. And so I started writing papers on the ontology of geography, basically. And I went to meetings of geospatial informatics people, some of whom were engineers already. Mm-hmm. And on the strength of that work, I then started to consider working on the ontology of other areas, and medicine was the next stage. Mm-hmm. I soon realized that the ontology of medicine means the ontology of biomedicine, and so the ontology of biology followed. And I'm already now working on systems without using the word systems. So I'm working on functions of molecules. I'm working on the role of molecules in cellular formation, cellular division, and so forth, cellular transport. Mm-hmm. All of these are systems, but I was not aware of the systems view. And during this time working on biomedicine, I met a German medical doctor and bioinformatician by the name of Jobst Landgräber. Jobst and I did a little bit of work on bioinformatics, and then for some years we didn't communicate, but then about 3 years ago, he called me from Germany and he said, I need to come to Buffalo. Mm-hmm. I have philosophical problems with my work in my company. He had an AI company. And so he came to Buffalo and we talked for 3-4 days, and we talked about systems. And the idea that he wanted to discuss with me was the limits of AI when dealing with the emulation of complex systems, whether biological systems or social systems, consciousness as a complex system, traffic systems. And eventually we came to write a book about the topic, namely the limits of AI when dealing with the emulation of complex systems. And so I started to work on the ontology of systems, simple systems, complex systems. Mm-hmm. What is a system? What is a hybrid system? What is a system of systems? And this is new work. It's consistent with what I've done before in ontology, but it's new because the systems perspective requires a new dimension to the ontological picture which I've been developing over the years.
That's wonderful. And I think, Barry, you mentioned like kind of, like ethics, making sure that, we're working, on the right things. Actually, when I was, my research is in transportation systems.
Yep.
But interestingly, somehow kind of it leads me, to the systems, engineering system science, because I look at emissions and the health impact of transportation, right, which is totally beyond.
Yeah.
So actually, this leads me to, one thing I was always asking myself, and I was even, talking to my son, and I realized, doing the right thing is way more important than doing the thing right.
Yeah.
Right. But in the meantime, if you look at the majority of our engineering education system, we do quite well in teaching students doing the things right. But I don't think we teach them enough to tell them how to identify the right things.
Yeah.
To work on. Speaking of that, I feel ontology and the systems view is becoming so important. Especially, for example, you're working, I guess, as a philosopher, and
Well, I'm certainly at the fringes of philosophy by now in my career. Most of the people I collaborate with are non-philosophers, which is unusual for a philosopher.
Yeah. So in that sense, kind of what's and also, you've been looking, from, geospatial informatics to medicine, and also to bio, from the cell scale, probably to the social scale, like if you look at the city, right? So from all these things, so what's in your view, are the major challenges that our human, as a species and our human civilization is facing?
So I think that if we're going to talk about doing the right thing, that there is an approach which works, has been made to work, has been shown to work in certain areas, but which should be applied much more generally. So if you're engineering, you want to engineer in the right way. Mm-hmm. And if you're using AI, you want to use AI in the right way. And so people say, well, that must mean that we have explainable AI. In other words, we have AI that we can explain to people so that they will understand that we're doing AI in the right way. Mm-hmm. But an AI system may be tantamount to a polynomial which has 1 billion parameters. So it's a polynomial function. You apply it to an input and you get an output, and it has 1 billion parameters. How can you possibly explain how 1 billion parameter algorithm works in human intelligible ways? So the way I would treat this kind of problem is always on the basis of outcomes measurement. Mm-hmm. So if you use this AI system or this engineering system in one way, it yields these outcomes. And if you use this system in another way, it yields those outcomes. Or if you use AI system 1, it yields these outcomes. If you use AI system 2, it yields those outcomes. So you need to have outcomes-based evaluation of engineering systems in general, including socio-technical systems, hospital systems. So one of the most interesting examples of this was one of my collaborators who looked at trauma systems across the country. And each trauma system is organized in its own way. And you can measure the outputs of trauma systems in terms of survival after major accidents. Mm-hmm. And so in principle, if you associate the survival rate with the organizational structure of the trauma system, you can draw conclusions as to which trauma system, and we're talking about systems again, which trauma system is going, or which practices, which organizational practices within trauma systems are going to have positive benefits in terms of outcomes. I think we should apply this kind of measure everywhere. So testing, certification is an example of this. Before you take an aeroplane and fly it, you test it over and over again before passengers ever get used. We should be testing AI systems in the same way. And then I'll mention one more point. In order to have outcomes-based measurement, which in baseball is called sabermetrics, mm-hmm. you need to have either a very simple kind of scoring system, which you have in baseball, mm-hmm. or you need an ontology. So for the trauma system work, the people who were doing the research built an ontology of organizations. And then you could tag the organizational structures used in all the trauma systems using the same codes, but the ontology codes. Similarly, you can use ontology to make sure that you describe the outcomes in the same way, and then you have a measurement possibility because you have the same measurement units. I think of ontology terms as being analogous in the qualitative world to units of measure in the quantitative world. If you have an ontology, you have a standard way of describing qualities. Just as if you have the international standard system of units, you have a consistent way of describing quantities. And to do outcomes measurement, you need a consistent way of describing. So that's what ontologies provide.
That's right. Outcome measurement and monitoring. They evaluate that. So speaking of that, I think I would like to kind of get to your recent book. Your book, Why Machines Will Not Rule in the World, will not rule the world. So you can see that AI it's emerging. Actually, it's already happening, right? As a kind of technology or a combination of technology and human intelligence, right? So of course, whenever we human beings, when we have new technology, especially new technology like this scale, and some are excited. Some are scared. And I think your book is probably trying to, answer questions to those who are scared. Right? So can we dive a little bit further into the book? Can you give us a brief, a description of the key findings or the key viewpoints?
Good.
In your book. Yes.
So it's a book which covers many, many disciplines. So we have physics, we have computer science, of course, we have philosophy, we have mathematics, thermodynamics. So we don't treat the computer just as an engineering device. We treat it as a physics device, which emits heat, for instance. And those kinds of aspects of computing are normally ignored by people who write about AI, but we wanted to treat the AI phenomenon in as realistic a way as possible.
As physical, like physical objects.
It's a physical object, which means that if you leave it to itself, it will do nothing. And if you leave it to itself and it's switched on, it will still do nothing, but it will emit heat. And eventually it will need maintenance. It will not work forever. But above all, it needs energy. So in order to do anything, it needs energy, which means it needs to be plugged in. And this sounds trivial, but if our laptop starts to do strange things, we can always unplug it and maybe reboot it. Now, there is a book which is one of the targets of one of the chapters in the book by Nick Bostrom, who is quite famous in the AI world. The book is called Superintelligence, and he describes a world in which computers have, by some means, which he doesn't describe in any coherent way, become conscious. They have acquired a will, and they have acquired an evil will. They want to take over the universe. They want to use humans as slaves, or they just leave the planet. They take over the galaxy. This is the idea. And the book is full of claims which are biologically and physically and computationally unrealistic. That they are claims which are based upon, as we show in our book, they're based upon quite naive understandings of what is possible. So I'll give you an example. He is talking about ways in which we could achieve superintelligence. One way is to breed superintelligent human beings. And he has a passage in which he says something like this: if we choose the most intelligent people that we can find, pair them voluntarily, I assume, and then we breed 100 generations, we can raise the average IQ of the people who are part of this breeding population by 43.2 IQ points.
Mm-hmm.
He says that, 43.2. Now, breeding and bringing people together and raising children and breeding again and so forth is a massively complex system. There is no way in which we can predict very much in detail about what will happen. Probably the whole experiment would fail after about 3 generations, but still, there's no way we can predict a number like 43.2 on the basis of a complex system. Too many things can go wrong. Too many things need to go right if any kind of outcome is going to be available. So this is just an example. And the general thesis of the book is that when we're dealing with complex systems, and we describe in great detail what a complex system is, only certain kinds of predictions are possible. And basically these are very narrow predictions which cover only a rather short space of time. So one prediction is that if you are hungry, then you will go looking for food. That's a prediction which has pretty general validity for human beings and for all animals. But to predict whether you will marry, whether if you marry you will divorce, whether you will ever be interested in gambling, there are many such predictions which you can't make for organisms because organisms are complex systems. So, and this means that very many of the predictions which Bostrom advances, they're out of this world. They are just unrealistic. But the most interesting part of Bostrom's book is the discussion of the machine will. Now, in order to have an evil will, in order to want to take over the planet, you have to have a will. And so I would invite all readers of AI literature to look at what Bostrom has to say about the will. He himself doesn't have anything to say about the will, but he cites one AI authority who has written about the will, Yudkowsky. He doesn't say how a machine will have a will, he just describes how it will be. Namely, it will be better than the human will. It will only want what the best human will would want. And so on and so on. In other words, he presupposes that there is a machine will. But one of the implications of our book is that there could never be a machine will, because to have a will, you need to have some very, very specialized kind of neurology, which animals and humans particularly have. And an AI system is a system for taking a number, a binary vector as an input, calculating another binary vector as an output. There is nowhere where a will can go in that system. And no one in the AI literature has described how you would create an AI will. There could be no AI will, and therefore there could be no singularity.
I like those viewpoints very much, and I think you look at it from a very fundamental level. That kind of, that raises a question from my side. When you talk about this view and also this intelligence, of course currently all the AI, they're based on all these physical computers, which you said consumes energy to do the computation, and even by learning, they'll probably discover something. But I have a question here. So before human beings, we are able to completely understand human brain.
Yeah.
Do you think we can make AIs that can have the will?
No. So this is another strategy for building an AI that would be generally intelligent in the way that humans are generally intelligent, namely to emulate the human brain. And we have a chapter on this idea, whole brain emulation. Now the problem here is, and this is a problem which has implications for our understanding of ourselves also. The brain is an incredibly complicated system. And it's incredibly complicated down to very, very fine levels. So smaller than molecules, ion levels. And we understand very, very little about the workings of the brain at these very, very fine levels. We have a lot of knowledge of the chemicals involved, the transport systems between cells, for instance, in the brain. So we know qualitatively what's going on. But if you look at textbooks of neurology, which may be 16,000 pages long, you find very few equations. That's because we can't measure what's going on at that level. With the imaging systems that we have, they're fantastic. They have a very high resolution. But to understand these fine-grained submolecular systems, these are systems of systems of systems, you would need imaging systems of much finer resolution, probably impossibly fine given the limits that we have on imaging devices. Moreover, we would have to kill the human being before we apply the imaging systems, because we can't see through the the bones which surround the brain, and in order to be able to work out how the human will works, we need a dynamically operating brain, not a dead brain. Now, all of this means that we cannot know enough about the workings of the brain to create an emulation of the brain in a machine. Already from the point of view of shortage of knowledge, we do not think that there is any way to gain this knowledge. So that the imaging system problems, the killing the patient problems, the problems of the lack of mathematical knowledge, which are probably insurmountable, but in any case, it's going to be a long time before we have enough knowledge. But even if we had all the knowledge, we couldn't create the emulation, because we're dealing with a complex system. And you can't emulate the behavior of a complex system using AI. That's another argument in the book. But I want to draw one more conclusion about the human will now. We know that we have a will. I can want to grab your paper from you now because it's annoying me. Then I can decide not to do that because it would be impolite. I have a will. That's because there are two ways in which we can access knowledge about our brain, both of which are physical. One is through imaging and through measuring using external sensors and so forth. The other is phenomenologically, so I can understand somehow the workings of my own brain. We don't know how that works, but we do know that we have knowledge of our own thought processes and willing processes. I know that I have a will, but I do not know that I have a free will. That has to do with the neurology, and we don't know much about how that neurology works. And maybe I have a free will, maybe not. I don't think we will ever know. That's a consequence, we believe, of the arguments in the book, that we know that we have a will, but philosophers address a lot of thought in trying to solve the problem of free will. We do not believe that that problem will ever be solved.
Yeah, you mentioned, it's kind of, yes, humans, we have the will, but we don't know, whether we have the free will or not. And I think the key thing is really, if you think about emulating it, you not only need to know that brain has a will, you also want to know how the will, is physically or chemically.
Yeah, and we know almost nothing about that.
So now, which means that we know almost nothing about it. So which means that we human beings, currently, we have a limit to this knowledge. Is this a good thing or bad thing, having a limit?
I don't have a view on it.
It's because one thing is that, of course, from medicine point of view, having the limit is really bad because it really limits, our capability to cure people, right? How the brain works.
Yes,
right? So, but for the,
I think about unintended consequences. So I think that we have limits to our knowledge. That is a fact. I don't worry about facts. It's a fact. We have to live with it. Now, I would assume that having more knowledge would bring not only benefits but also it would cause problems.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what those problems are in medicine, for instance, but I'm sure that there would be unintended consequences.
Social consequences,
for instance.
Yeah.
And so I just don't think along those lines. I don't like thinking about hypotheticals. And so I think that there are already enough problems that are really going to be caused by the devices that we are going to build and by what we are going to understand. For instance, self-driving cars, for instance, there are all kinds of real problems that we can think about. And they're problems which, again, depend in part upon the lack of knowledge of a certain sort. Yeah. And I much prefer to think about those kinds of problems than problems about hypothetical worlds in which we could know more.
Yeah, I think, Barry, I think our discussion is really kind of, evolving around technology and, of course, physical and biology, kind of the base of technology. And, of course, like human society, like if you think, the larger scale. It's really a general topic of technology and the human society, right? So, and you're right, any devices, any technology, including, for example, nuclear technology. Right, you brought out all this enormous energy density, right? That can be, given out in a very short time. That if you use it, you make earlier in the right way, right? It gives you energy, and if you don't use it in the right way. Right, it has those. So what's your view in general, and especially nowadays? I feel like our world, our society, we are living towards more and more of a technological world.
Yeah.
Right, from the smartphone.
Yeah.
Right, and to, as you mentioned, autonomous vehicles, and then to AI. So what's your general view about technology and society, and especially when you say that we need to use everything, and including use our education, use our engineers in the right way. But how do we define the right way? Because the right way 100 years ago now is no longer the right way. So, and the technology, technology and society, and how do we use them in the right way?
So, first of all, the implication of our book is that a lot of the investment in AI at the moment is not going to yield fruit. So with the final chapter of the book is about what we believe are the fruitful uses of AI. And there are fruitful uses of AI, and there'll be many more. So we think that AI will continue to bring great benefits for human society. And we believe that there is no reason to be afraid of what AI will do, because the present phase during which this idea of the singularity is taken seriously, we believe that this will gradually wane, and with luck, our book will have some influence on that.
Yeah, hope so. Yeah.
Now, with regard to with engineering devices or mechanical devices or inventions in general, I am quite optimistic. I think that the world will continue to become a more civilized place in which there will be more benefits that the rich countries in the world enjoy. I think these benefits will spread further throughout the world, as they have been doing for the last 100, 200 years or so. So I am quite optimistic. And I try not to worry about things like nuclear war and so forth, because I can't influence those things.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you, and I think I'm also optimistic. Right, so, and I think you mentioned earlier, we human beings, we use our intelligence, use our intellectual power to have these inventions. So basically, we produce, including AI or computer, we invent all these devices such that we can slave them.
Yeah.
Right. We're basically, but then in your book, and especially when you're dealing with AI, some people, have the concerns that AI could slave us.
Yeah.
That's kind of your book is.
And the book is saying that is impossible.
That is impossible, yeah. Right? That is possible because you say that because they are not going to rule us.
They do not and cannot have a will. That's the thing.
That's
can't. And if you look at the great achievements of AI, you will see how much it's not, in fact, artificial intelligence which is doing the work. It's human intelligence. Humans decide the data samples which are going to be used. They decide the goals of the AI system, because the computer has no will. So humans have to provide the goals. Humans describe the rules with which those goals will be achieved. And in the case of AlphaFold, for instance, which is the new DeepMind protein folding AI system. It's an amazing system. It really is an acme of human invention. It uses mathematics, which is 300 years old, the triangle inequality, for instance. It uses a huge amount of human knowledge from the development of civilization, and it's all usable because we have the computer. But it's humans who program the computer, who decide what to do with the computer. The computer then performs amazingly impressive calculations, but they can do that because of all this investment of humans in telling it what to do. So I'm not at all worried that the computers will take over from the humans. The worst that can happen is that some crazy, mad humans will try to use computers in order to achieve their ends. But the computers won't help them in that, in the sense that they will not make the crucial decisions. All the crucial decisions will be made by the humans. And there are lots of other humans who do not want human civilization to be taken over by these evil people. And so we will revert back to equilibrium in due course. So this is the same problem as the gun problem. So there's no such thing as gun ethics. And similarly, there's no such thing as AI ethics, because guns can't think or will, and computers can't think or will. It's people who do those things.
That's great. So that of course, that cleans up the concerns of many people, right? AI will not, rule us.
Yeah.
So instead, actually, because consistent with the purpose that we human beings, invent devices before, AI can be slaved to work for us.
It's always enslaved. Just every computer program is written by a human being. Now we can program computers to write other programs, but it's still a human being who is the governor, the causal factor in that causal chain.
Yeah, I think that word already came out. My next question was, no, AI won't be able to rule us.
Yeah.
But can human beings use AI to help us govern us? Not rule us, but govern us. And do a better job in governing.
So I talked already about outcomes-based research. Now, and I was talking to one of your colleagues about the idea of using outcomes-based models for policy decisions. I certainly think that outcomes-based measurement is going to be useful, at least in the kinds of political areas where we have choices of different policies. So I think more testing, more empirical studies of the effects of different policies will have positive consequences also on the political level. I think there is too little empirical testing of policies in the education field, for instance, school education particularly. And the more we have empirical testing, the more we have sabermetrics also in the school system, the more the school system will improve, I believe. Teachers don't like sabermetrics very much, though.
That's true. That's true. So I think it's kind of, this reminds me, one thing. I feel kind of artificial intelligence, it's really going to take advantage of the speed and the capacity of, computing in comparison to human brains. So basically, it's really, I think, it expedites and also it upscale, right? All the human brains. Actually, in certain aspects, not every aspect.
Exactly. The key is AI works only in relation to certain aspects along narrow lanes. So it might be a game like Go, it might be protein folding, which is one area of biology where we have a relatively well-conserved system across different organisms, which is why AlphaFold could be created, because there is a system there which creates reliably the same pattern over and over again in different cases, or a very similar pattern. But in most of biology, we don't have these narrow lanes. We have systems which have thousands of different dimensions. And so we can't predict how those systems will behave. This is why we can't predict whether a marriage will end in divorce or whether a child will become a criminal or any such predictions which involve complex systems. we can make predictions only along narrow lanes of certain sorts. For instance, about hunger and eating and so forth. Synoptic predictions, emulations of behavior, are impossible when we're dealing with complex systems.
Yeah. So Barry, I think this is kind of, I don't know whether this question is going to be, crazy or not. You just think about it. It's because, either, philosophers or, historians or biologists, a lot of time, right, people ask about, I put the social aspect aside, the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Right. So meaning of life, actually, if you put the social side aspect aside, if you just think about the physical side, and some people are saying that the meaning of life is really kind of passing information. DNA, that information you pass from one generation to another generation, and the species, as a human species, you are really passing this information, right? So of course, this information and also the way how it's passed along and how it evolves. So far, for human beings, right, we are not totally, kind of capable of understanding, including the human brain. But now we're saying that AI, computer, can help us expedite this learning process to find out these things. So 2 questions. One, with the help of, AI or whatever, this computing, that will expedite our learning capability, our learning speed, and also enlarge our learning capability. Will we someday be able to get the whole thing, even the detail level of how this information is passed along and evolved through this, human and also animal species? That's my question 1. And my question 2 is, assuming that we are able to understand those whole things, by that time, that human beings, we say, oh, now we know everything. Is that going to be good or bad?
Good. Okay, so I have thought about the meaning of life. I have a video on my YouTube channel called The Meaning of Life.
Mm-hmm.
And I will give you the brief summary of my account, which is consistent with the line of your first question, I believe. Beethoven had a meaningful life because he created wonderful pieces of music which can be enjoyed, admired, experienced by many other people. So we have a paradigm case of a meaningful life. We would all like to lead a life which is meaningful in the way that Beethoven's life was meaningful. And now, how can you lead a meaningful life like Beethoven? Well, creativity of a sort which affects other people's lives. And this may be creativity on the small scale. So you may have a mother who leads a meaningful life because she brings up 4 excellent children, for instance. That will be hard work and so forth. So that a meaningful life generally will involve great effort. It will be difficult. You don't lead a meaningful life by doing things which are easy, or by cheating, or by stealing. So Beethoven would not have led a meaningful life if he'd stolen all his music from some poor slave.
There's no place he can steal that kind of work.
Right. So how can AI contribute to this issue of a meaningful life? Well, we have a whole new area of creative opportunities. I think the people who built AlphaFold created an achievement of humankind, not of AI, not of machines, but of humankind, which is at the same level as one of Beethoven's lesser symphonies, or maybe even one of his greater symphonies. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing what we can achieve with AI. And the book, the final chapter, maybe it's not as enthusiastic about AI as I'm being now, mm-hmm. But still, the AI is another avenue for leading a meaningful life. Mm-hmm. Now, to your second question, there is a man, I'm afraid I've forgotten his name, but we mentioned him in the book, in England, who thinks that AI is going to make the patenting system superfluous. It will disappear. Mm-hmm. Now remember, the patenting system is one of the measurement vehicles that we have for measuring human creativity, mm-hmm. invention. Yes. Patenting system is an amazing measure. And usually where we have a measure for some activity, then we have more of that activity, but also higher quality over time. So the patenting system is one of the treasures of human life. He thinks it will be abandoned. Why? Because he thinks that that AI systems will anticipate all discoveries, because they will have the entire body of scientific knowledge, and they will have the entire power of very powerful computers to race through all of that scientific knowledge and pre-invent every possible invention. Mm-hmm. This is nonsense on multiple levels. First of all, they will never have all scientific knowledge, because science is growing all the time, by whatever means. Secondly, science is a complex system of complex systems at many levels. And there's no way in which you can get all scientific knowledge into the computer. But thirdly, inventing is always a complex matter. That the invention is an invention because it isn't like anything which came before. And to create an invention, therefore, involves some kind of knowledge of what exists, knowledge of the needs that the invention might satisfy. And that means knowledge of complex systems. And that's the kind of knowledge that computers, if our book is correct, are going to have little access to. And so we'll always need humans for inventions. And so there will never be a time when computers will pre-invent the inventions which humans invent only with great pain. So precisely because of that great pain, I am all in favor of inventions, because no pain, no gain. You don't become Beethoven without suffering. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you don't have a meaningful life without the kind of suffering that it needs to become a successful inventor.
That's beautiful. My question towards the end, I would like to ask you about real education.
Yeah.
Right. You can see in the world, including all these challenges and even a lot of confusion that our future generations and our young people are facing. So for our system engineering education, so I would like to definitely hear your insight and wisdom about how we should educate our future, not only engineers, but really our future generations, to be able to not only view this complexity, but somehow they'll be able to get some capability to put their arms around, such complexity. So what things, what disciplines, or what knowledge will be important, and how can we distill, such treasures into the future generations' minds?
So, I was talking to some of your colleagues earlier, and I really am a strong believer, in this outcomes measurement certification approach to what we do, policy and so forth, and B, the need for ontology if we're going to have a measurement system for both outcomes and the precursors of outcomes, namely the things we build, the systems of policy or of mechanical systems, or indeed rules of games like baseball. Ontology, I don't often get the chance to think in this way about ontology, but ontology is, I believe, the perfect vehicle for coherent multidisciplinary research. So if you have a multidisciplinary organization like your unit here, then you're going to have people who know one discipline. So everyone knows systems engineering, and each of them knows one particular discipline very well, which may be anything from policy to traffic management to education organization. There are some things that they all need to share, which they will share already because they have the common systems engineering education. But there are other things they need to share, which they may not realize they are not sharing accurately or adequately. And an example would be organizations. So if you have an ontology of organizations, 2/3 of your people are dealing with organization systems. they could all benefit from having a common organization ontology, which will give you a coherent set of definitions of the key terms in organizational theory, and B, definitions in a form which can be used by computers, which a dictionary will not give you. And so this would be my proposal for advancing your educational efforts here.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just my final one would be definitely agree with this ontology, and actually that's something I feel. So for information, actually, I did recruit a PhD student, who works with me, and his bachelor's and master degrees were both in philosophy.
Oh yes.
We work on ontology. Actually, we were working on ontology about future urban infrastructure for smart cities. It's because
is he here? Will he be here today?
I believe so.
Okay.
Actually, he's a very close friend of
Christian.
A Christian. Yes. And another thing is actually what I was going to ask you is, I think at the very beginning of our conversation, you also mentioned math.
Yes.
And also related, you say the outcome measurement, to be able to measure it, right? Somehow the math will also come in, the quantitative analytical aspects will come in, which usually engineering education is strong about, right? So, but I just want to while you have emphasized the importance of ontology and like particular tools that dimension, like those analytical, mathematical. What's your view about those aspects?
Okay, so this is actually an important area about which I believe the ontology world generally, so not just me, have too little to say. We have too little understanding. So generally speaking, the ontological method has been successful in qualitative science like biology and medicine. Now also in industrial applications and in military applications. But it's been less successful when it comes to areas where quantitative data is dominant, which would mean physics. Yeah. So one of my current projects, in fact, I'm writing another book with my German collaborator, is about the ontology of physics. So that's the next step.
Can I pry into it a little bit? Since you are in the ontology and the physics, that seems to be connecting the two, like ontology very qualitative, while physics kind of pretty mathematical, analytical.
Yeah. So I would just say, as a taster, that probably physics doesn't need ontology because we have mathematics and the vocabulary of physics is pretty universal. So we don't need to explain what harmonic oscillator is to a physicist, because every physicist understands harmonic oscillator in the same way. Mm-hmm. But there are areas where an ontology approach can be useful nonetheless. So first of all, units of measure are already an ontology. They are an international ontology system. So that one issue is, what is the relationship between physical theory and units of measure? That is a very difficult question. Mm-hmm. The next question has to do with applied physics. Mm-hmm. So applied physics includes devices, including computers, but also including weapons and all the devices that we see around us in this room, cameras and coffee machines and so forth, lighting systems. All of these are devices which work because they incorporate some real exemplification of multiple physical structures. How do we understand the relationship between physical theory, which is about abstract structures? Mm-hmm. So there is no harmonic oscillator in the world. That's an abstract entity. But yet we have harmonic oscillator involving systems everywhere around us. What is the connection? And then finally there is measurement of the behavior, not only of these devices, but also of organic things, of the planet and so forth. So physics is a theoretical structure which is next door to mathematics, and which is connected to physical applications, which are then connected to the biological and natural environment, via measurements and therefore via units of measure.
Mm-hmm.
To understand how all of this fits together, that is the goal of our physics ontology work.
I see. Actually, physics ontology is really a very critical segment. When you go from, right, you kind of go from the mathematics and then to the applied world.
Yeah.
Right, we try to define the measurement, the unit.
Yeah.
And that's where it's ontology.
The ontology is going to cover all of that. For the first time, we will have an ontological framework which covers not just theoretical physics, where, as I say, ontology is little needed. It doesn't have much application, all the way to physical devices in the real world.
I see. I think. Barry, thank you so much. Actually, from this conversation, I'm going to take away, I think, one very important message with me, because I feel like facing all these different technologies in this complicated world, and many people are concerned. I think the major reason we are concerned because we are not able to see through, the complexity. But I think your book is really guide people through, not only the depths, the whole chain of the thinking, but also really with the depths, right, with logic argument. Why? And you're telling us, actually you are optimistic.
I'm optimistic.
Yeah. I think that's very good to know. So in that case, just out of curiosity, because I was reading, usually people, and many, very outstanding, human beings in history, they are brilliant because they are able to see things through that average people cannot see. And for those people, actually, because they see much more, they see much longer from the past to the future, such that most of them, they became pessimistic, right? Because, if you think about your future, but what keeps you optimistic? Because the more you see, right, the longer you see, actually, you realize, you humbly realize.
So what keeps me optimistic is the gigantic, phenomenal achievements of the technosphere in the last 200 years. So just look at all the things that we can do today that we couldn't even think about doing 200 years ago. And it's all thanks to the development of modern science and thereby also modern industry. So that's grounds for optimism, I believe.
That's great to know. Hopefully, history will repeat itself,
this
good part.
We'll continue.
We'll continue. Yes, we'll continue. Yes,
upwards.
Upward spiral. Even though we're going to have spirals, but we're going to keep upward.
Yeah, there'll be odd spirals, but we'll be fine.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Barry.
Thank you.
I think we end our conversation.
Great.
I really enjoyed this, and I think as you can imagine, as an engineer, I'm always fascinated by people like you. You really, towards the end I said, you see much bigger and longer, and you point the right directions to us.
Well, I hope so.